Every rule the avoidant made for themselves has an exception. Not a theoretical exception, not the exception that lives in the abstract space of what might be possible if circumstances were different, or the timing were better, or the person were somehow more perfectly calibrated to the precise specifications of what the nervous system could tolerate. A real exception. A living, breathing, entirely specific exception that walks into the avoidant's life without announcement and proceeds to make the entire architecture of their self-protection feel, for the first time in possibly decades, slightly absurd. The defences that held against everyone else develop, in the presence of this person, a quality of irrelevance. Not because they were dismantled, because the person they were built against, the intruding, the needing, the approaching with emotional weight that required management, simply did not arrive. What arrived instead was someone the architecture was never designed to process, someone who did not trigger the protocols, who moved through the space between them without the avoidance system registering the usual alarm. And by the time the system caught up, by the time the management strategies mobilized and the deactivating narratives assembled and the familiar machinery of self-protection came fully online, the feeling was already there, already real, already past the point at which containment was a realistic option. The avoidant, who has navigated decades of potential intimacy without once losing the manageable distance, finds themselves genuinely, bewilderingly, irreversibly in. What made it possible is not luck, not chemistry in the vague, inexplicable sense that gets used when people do not want to examine what actually happened. It is specific, identifiable. The qualities that together form this person, not each one alone, but the particular combination of all of them existing simultaneously in a single human being, constitute something the avoidance system encounters so rarely that it has no practiced response. This is what that person is made of. Begin at the root. Before the qualities that are visible, before the behaviour that can be observed, before anything that shows in how this person moves through the world. Begin with what they carry in the interior that nobody directly sees, but everyone somehow feels. This person has made peace with their own incompleteness, not resigned themselves to it, not accepted their limitations in the defeated way of someone who tried and failed and settled. Made actual peace. The kind that produces, in its wake, a quality of self-relation that is neither self-inflating nor self-diminishing, that sees the full picture, the capacities and the gaps, the genuine strengths and the genuine places where growth is still in process, and regards all of it with something that is not quite equanimity and not quite love, but is closer to both of those things than most people ever manage to reach in their own self-relation. The significance of this for the avoidant is not immediately obvious. It becomes obvious when you understand what the avoidant most dreads about intimacy. Intimacy requires being seen, and being seen requires tolerating the possibility that what is seen, the defended places, the loneliness inside the self-sufficiency, the gap between the presented self and the actual interior, will produce in the witness a response that confirms the avoidant's worst privately held belief about themselves, that the real version is insufficient, that full knowing would mean full rejection. The person who has made peace with their own incompleteness does not carry the judgment that activates this dread. Their relationship with human limitation, including their own, including others, is too honest and too accepting to generate the evaluative gaze the avoidant has been armouring against. They are not looking for perfection because they have genuinely relinquished the demand for it in themselves. And someone who does not demand perfection of themselves cannot weaponize the imperfection they find in others. This is the safest person the avoidant has ever been seen by, and they did not announce it. They did not perform their acceptance. It is simply present in how they engage with the world, in the complete absence of the particular tension that belongs to people who are constantly measuring and finding wanting. The second quality, and it announces itself in the earliest interactions, before either person has consciously registered what is happening between them. This person thinks, not in the generic sense that all people think, in the specific, rare, genuinely pleasurable sense of someone who finds the engagement of their own intelligence intrinsically satisfying, who has developed actual perspectives on actual things, not the performance of having perspectives, not the adoption of positions that signal the right group membership, but the real, lived, sometimes inconvenient thing of having genuinely examined something and arrived somewhere specific on the basis of that examination. The avoidant, who is almost universally intellectually sharp and who has learned to use intellectual engagement as one of the cleaner, less emotionally exposing forms of connection, responds to this quality with something close to relief. Here is someone they can actually talk to, not talk at, not talk past, talk to, with the genuine back and forth of two people whose thinking changes shape in response to encountering each other's thinking. The conversation that does not follow a script, that arrives somewhere neither person anticipated when it began, that makes both of them slightly different on the other side of it than they were when they entered. This kind of conversation is, for the avoidant, one of the most intimate experiences accessible, because it requires genuine presence without requiring the emotional exposure that more direct intimacy demands. The intellect can be fully present, fully engaged, fully alive in the interaction, while the deeper interior is still protected. And the extraordinary thing about this person is that the conversation, over time, dissolves that boundary, not by crossing it, but by making it gradually less necessary. The intimacy of genuine intellectual encounter, the experience of being actually met in thinking, creates a different kind of closeness. One that arrives through the side door. One that the avoidance system, which was guarding the front door, did not think to lock. Here is a quality that exists in this person so naturally that they are probably not fully aware of carrying it. They do not need to be the most important thing in the relationship, in the room, in the avoidance interior. They do not carry the silent, often unconscious expectation that being loved means being primary, being central, being the organizing principle around which the other person's attention and energy and emotional life is arranged. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily rare. The majority of relational suffering, on both sides of most dynamics, comes from the gap between the implicit expectation of centrality and the actual experience of the relationship. People do not always articulate this expectation. They do not always know they carry it, but it runs. In the hurt that arrives when the partner is absorbed in something else, in the specific sting of not being chosen first, in the monitoring of how much of the other person's inner life is occupied with thoughts of them. This person does not run that expectation. They are genuinely, not performatively, comfortable with the avoidant having a full interior life that does not revolve around them, with having interests and absorptions and periods of inwardness that are not about the relationship, with the relationship being one of the significant things in the avoidant's life, rather than the singular lens through which everything else is filtered. For the avoidant, whose most suffocating relational experiences have involved the felt pressure of being someone else's everything, whose system reacts to that pressure with the specific alarm of impending engulfment, this quality is oxygen, not merely pleasant, structurally necessary. The difference between a relationship that activates the withdrawal response and one that does not. The avoidant can breathe in the presence of this person, can have their full interior life, can be absorbed and inward and temporarily elsewhere without the quality of someone being hurt by the elsewhere. And in the space that the breathing creates, the space that was previously occupied by the management of someone else's need for centrality, something new becomes possible. Genuine choice. The avoidant choosing, from the unconstrained position of not being pressured, to direct attention and warmth and presence toward this person. Not because the management of their hurt requires it, because the desire to is actually, freely, genuinely there. Chosen freely is different from chosen under pressure in every way that matters. Fourth quality. And this one lives in the body before it lives in the mind. This person is comfortable with silence. Not the silence of someone who has given up. Not the silence of someone managing their hurt by withholding communication. Not the strategic silence of someone performing unavailability. The genuine, inhabited, peaceful silence of someone who does not need the space between two people to be constantly filled in order to believe the connection is intact. The avoidant has, in almost every significant relationship, encountered the particular anxiety that silence produces in people who are not comfortable with it. the reaching for conversation when conversation is not necessary, the interpreting of quiet as distance, the slight panic that arrives when the exchange stops and the other person's need to restart it becomes its own form of pressure. With this person, silence is allowed to be silence. Two people, quiet, present, not requiring the quiet to be explained or resolved or converted into the reassuring activity of connection maintenance, simply together. In the specific ease of company that needs nothing to prove itself. This ease is one of the deepest comforts the avoidant has ever experienced in another person's presence. Because the avoidant lives significantly in interior spaces, thinks, processes, inhabits the world through inwardness in a way that most people do not. And a partner who requires the interior to constantly be converted into exterior expression, who needs the words, the communication, the evidence of presence in vocal and demonstrative form, is a partner with whom the avoidant is perpetually slightly failing, perpetually slightly not enough in the domain of expression. This person requires nothing of the interior except that it exists, and knowing it exists is enough. And the not requiring is experienced by the avoidant as the most generous thing another person has offered them, because it means they are accepted, actually accepted, in the form they actually take. Not the more expressive, more demonstrative, more verbally accessible form someone else's needs might require. The actual form. Quiet, interior rich, communicating in the understated registers that are natural to them. Accepted in the form they actually take is the thing the avoidant stopped hoping for so long ago that finding it produces something close to disorientation. Now the quality that explains more of the avoidant's experience of this person than perhaps any other. This person is impossible to fully know, not because they are withholding, not because they are defended, because they are genuinely, continuously in process, interested in their own development in a way that keeps them slightly ahead of where they were, always in the middle of something, a phase of thinking, a period of growth, a new area of understanding that is reshaping something about how they see things, always becoming, in a way that means any picture formed of them has already slightly outdated itself. The avoidant, who in most relationships reaches a point of feeling that they have fully mapped the other person, and who, upon completing the mapping, begins to experience the relationship as a known quantity that no longer generates the particular aliveness of genuine discovery, does not reach that point with this person, because this person keeps becoming. There is always more, always a new angle, always a depth that the previous conversation approached but did not fully reach. Always the specific, pleasurable experience of thinking you have understood someone, and then encountering a dimension of them that reorganizes the understanding. This inexhaustibility is not the inexhaustibility of inconsistency. It is the inexhaustibility of genuine depth, of a person who has enough interior, enough layers of thought and feeling and developed perspective and honest self-examination, that sustained engagement does not produce the flatness of a fully mapped terrain. For the avoidant, who experiences the fading of novelty as one of the primary mechanisms of relational disengagement, who has left relationships not because something went wrong, but because the aliveness of genuine discovery had settled into the predictability of a known thing, this person is the answer to a problem the avoidant may not have consciously identified. The relationship does not go flat. Cannot go flat, because the person in it is not flat. They are continuously generating new interior territory, new things worth encountering, new depths worth descending into with the specific curiosity that genuine interest produces. The avoidant does not eventually run out of reasons to stay. The sixth quality requires a specific kind of attention because it is one that almost never makes the explicit list, but explains an enormous amount. This person repairs well. Every relationship has ruptures, moments where misattunement occurs, where something lands wrong, where the connection is interrupted by the ordinary friction of two people with different interiors attempting genuine proximity. What matters, what actually determines the long-term sustainability of a relationship, is not whether ruptures occur. It is what happens after. Most ruptures in the avoidance relational history have followed a particular pattern. The rupture occurs. The other person experiences it as significant. The significance activates their need for resolution. The need for resolution arrives as pressure. The pressure activates the avoidance withdrawal. The withdrawal intensifies the other person's need for resolution. And the spiral continues until distance or a surface level resolution that leaves the underlying thing unaddressed. This person does something different with ruptures. They allow the repair to occur at the pace available to both people, rather than the pace their own anxiety requires. They communicate what happened clearly, directly, without the passive architecture of withheld hurt. And then they wait, without the waiting becoming a form of pressure, without the repair being organised around producing a specific emotional response from the avoidant. They repair without needing the avoidant to perform contrition, without requiring the full emotional reckoning to happen immediately in the moment, when the avoidance system may not yet be ready for it. With enough patience for the repair to be genuine, rather than rushed into form by the discomfort of the rupture remaining temporarily unresolved. This approach to repair is, for the avoidant, completely novel. Every previous experience of relational rupture has been, at some level, a reconfirmation of the cost of closeness. This person's approach to rupture does something unprecedented. It makes the cost feel manageable. And manageable cost is the specific condition under which the avoidance system updates its risk assessment, under which the calculus of closeness versus safety begins, for the first time, to shift. Seventh, the way this person loves. Not the fact of their love, the way of it. The specific texture and direction and quality of how love moves in this person when it is genuinely present. This person loves concretely, not in the abstract, not in the grand declaration, not in the stated position, not in the explicit articulation of feeling that the avoidance system finds simultaneously moving and overwhelming. In the specific, small, unhurried, concrete expressions that require attention to notice, but that are, to the person receiving them, undeniable evidence of being genuinely held in mind. The thing remembered from months ago that surfaces in the exact right moment. The accommodation made without commentary. The noticing of the small things, not for the purpose of demonstrating the noticing, not as evidence to be presented, but because the noticing is the natural result of genuine attention, and genuine attention does not require performance. This is the love language of someone who understands, perhaps without having theorized it, that the avoidant receives best in the quiet register. That grand expression activates the system's need to reciprocate at an equivalent volume, and the system that cannot yet produce equivalent volume experiences grand expression as a kind of relational debt, as something that requires a response it may not yet be able to give, and whose inability to give it becomes another layer of the familiar shame of failing intimacy. Concrete, quiet, specific love does not require that kind of response. It is given and received, and the giving is complete in itself. No invoice, no balance to be maintained, no pressure of equivalence. The avoidant receives this love not as debt, but as gift. And receiving it as gift, the avoidant, slowly, without quite noticing the accumulation, begins to generate their own, in the same register, in the same quiet, specific, concrete way. Not because the system was pushed into it, because the system was simply loved in a way it could receive. And receiving love, it turned out, was what the system needed to learn before giving it could become possible. Eighth quality. And this one is the one that surprises the avoidant most in its effect. This person holds their own pain without requiring witnesses. They have been through things, significant things, the kind that leave marks that are permanent even when they become manageable. And they carry those things in a way that is neither dramatized nor suppressed, which is to say, they carry them honestly. They can speak of them when it is appropriate, without the speaking becoming a performance of wound, without the disclosure of difficulty becoming an implicit request for the other person to provide the meaning or the comfort or the resolution that the pain is still, at some level, seeking. They have metabolized their history, not completed the process does not complete, but taken it far enough that the past is genuinely past, informing the present without governing it, present in the texture of who they are, without being the primary content of who they are in every interaction. The avoidant, whose own unprocessed history is carried with a specific heaviness that the self-sufficiency architecture manages rather than resolves, who knows, at some level beneath the management, that there are things in the interior that have not been fully examined, encounters this person and recognizes something. The possibility of carrying the weight without being flattened by it, the evidence that the things which were defended against could be, in the right conditions, with the right kind of internal work, actually integrated rather than perpetually managed. This person is not the therapist who will do that work for the avoidant. They are the evidence that the work is survivable, that people exist on the other side of it, that the interior, fully encountered rather than defended against, does not produce the devastation the architecture was built to prevent. Meeting that evidence in embodied form changes something, below the level of conscious decision. In the place where beliefs about what is possible are stored and revised only by experience rather than by reasoning. Here is the quality the avoidant least expects to matter as much as it does. This person finds them funny, not politely amused, not performing delight at their wit to generate warmth. Actually, genuinely, specifically responsive to the particular brand of humour that the avoidant carries, which tends toward the dry, the oblique, the reference dense, the kind that requires a certain quality of attention to land at all. The kind that most people either miss or half laugh at with the lag of someone who is not quite sure. This person gets it, in real time, with the specific, unguarded, genuine laugh that cannot be manufactured because it arrives before the social calculation has time to intervene. The significance of this is not trivial. Humour for the avoidant is one of the primary channels through which genuine intimacy moves, because it is one of the few forms of genuine self-expression that does not activate the containment response. The self that appears in authentic humour is not defended. It is present. It is offering something of the actual interior, the specific way of seeing things that belongs to this person, without the offering being emotionally loaded enough to trigger the system's management. Being genuinely met in that offering, having the specific way they see the world received not with polite appreciation, but with real, resonant recognition. This tells the avoidant something about this person that 3 hours of earnest conversation might not have communicated. You actually see me, not the presentation, not the managed surface, the actual, somewhat peculiar, specifically angled way I move through the world. And you like it. That recognition, arriving through laughter rather than declaration, goes somewhere in the avoidant that declarations cannot reach, straight through the defences, into the part of the interior that was not braced because the humour was not flagged as intimacy. But it was intimacy, of the most honest kind. 10th quality, the one that makes everything else sustainable over time. This person is consistent in a way that has nothing to do with predictability. Consistency and predictability are different things. Predictability is sameness, the quality of a person who is reliably the same across contexts, whose behaviour can be anticipated because it does not vary. Predictability can become, over time, the flatness that the avoidant experiences as reason to disengage. Consistency is something different entirely. It is alignment. The quality of a person whose behaviour across wildly different contexts and temperatures and circumstances expresses the same underlying values, the same underlying character, the same essential self. Who is not the same in every situation, but is recognisably themselves in every situation. Whose response to difficulty and to ease, to rupture and to connection, to being seen and to being challenged, all carry the fingerprint of the same interior. This consistency is what allows the avoidance system to gradually, over time and accumulated evidence, revise its threat assessment. Because the avoidance threat assessment is not updated by declarations, not by promises, not by the sincere articulation of intention. It is updated by evidence, by the patient accumulation of experiences in which the predicted consequence, the hurt, the withdrawal of care, the punishment for closeness, the disappointment of reaching and not being met, does not arrive, in which the thing that was braced against does not occur, in which showing up, being slightly more open, allowing the connection to be slightly more real, produces not the anticipated harm, but the unanticipated experience of actually being okay. This person's consistency provides that evidence. Not quickly, not in a single demonstrative moment. Over time. In the small, ordinary, unremarkable instances of being the same person they were yesterday and the day before. Of their warmth not being contingent on the avoidant's performance. Of their presence not requiring the avoidant to maintain a certain level of reciprocity in order to remain. The avoidant's nervous system updates slowly, through experience rather than decision. And the experience this person provides, consistent, real, patient, is the only input with the right format to produce the update, the last quality, the one beneath all the others, the one that, if it were absent, would make every other quality insufficient. This person wants the avoidant, specifically, not the potential version, not the person they might become if the walls came down and the patterns were healed and the full interior were finally accessible. The actual current version, the defended and brilliant and funny and complicated and not yet fully open version that shows up on an ordinary day when the system is running its usual management and the warmth is present in its usual understated registers. That version, wanted, specifically, without the wanting being organised around a project of transformation. This distinction between wanting someone and wanting the project of helping them become more emotionally available is one the avoidant detects with accuracy that borders on the uncanny. The person who loves the avoidant as a renovation project does not love the avoidant. They love the avoidant as raw material, as the person they will be once the work is done. And that love, however well-intentioned, carries something that lands on the avoidant's nervous system as pressure, as the implicit communication that what is currently present is insufficient and the relationship is conditional on improvement. This person does not send that signal. They are genuinely, unmistakably present with the version that exists right now. Their desire for the avoidant does not contain a vision of a better avoidant. It contains the avoidant, as they are, carrying what they carry, moving the way they move, loving in the quiet, specific, sometimes oblique way they love. And something about being wanted in this specific form, not despite the armour, but without the armour, being treated as the primary fact about them, does what no amount of pressure to change has ever done. It makes the armour feel, for the first time, like something that might be set down. Not dismantled, not broken, set down, temporarily, in the presence of someone in whose presence it is not required. Because it was always protection against a specific thing, and that specific thing, being seen fully and found insufficient, is not present in this person, has never been present in this person. And the sustained experience of its absence is the only thing that has ever, in the avoidant's entire history, produced the particular quality of interior settling that the architecture was, paradoxically, always searching for. Safety. Real safety. The safety of someone who is not going to use your vulnerability against you, who is not going to find the real interior and leave, who is not going to confirm the belief that was written into the system before it had words. This is the person, not a type, not a strategic profile, not a set of behaviours executed with sufficient consistency to hack the avoidance nervous system into attachment. A whole, specific, complete human being whose particular combination of qualities, the made peace with incompleteness, the genuine thinking, the comfort with silence, the inexhaustible depth, the concrete love, the metabolized pain, the specific humour, the consistency, the wanting of the actual person rather than the potential, constitutes something the avoidance system encounters and cannot, does not want to, manage. And here is the thing that matters most. You may recognize this person, not as someone you have met, as someone you are becoming, as the version of yourself that exists on the other side of the compression, the smallness that difficult dynamics install in people who were never small to begin with. As the person who was always there, underneath the reaching and the accommodating and the self-calibrating around another person's capacity, waiting with the patient persistence of things that are genuinely and inalienably present in you. The avoidant falls for this person because this person is real, is whole, is entirely, unapologetically, without performance or strategy themselves. And there is nothing, no defense, no architecture, no decades of practiced self-protection that holds indefinitely against the simple, extraordinary, entirely sufficient fact of someone being completely, genuinely, irreducibly themselves. Not for the avoidant, not for anyone. The real thing, fully inhabited, is the only thing that was ever truly irresistible. And it was always yours.